joining. This will be my first presentation, so be kind to me. What I would like to show you today is .NET configuration, but done properly. So with .NET, practically with every project, we need to deal with configuration, and very often it causes some issues, and it might be easier to work with configuration. So today agenda is in the first place we'll talk what is configuration and why it's good to set it up correctly. What are the common pain points and what troubles we come across when we work with configuration, how we can reduce the complexity of setting it up and using it in our applications, and then how we could add validation for better clarity of what's going on with our configuration entries. And in the end, short Q&A. If you will have any questions, then I'm happy to discuss them. So the application configuration, of course, it refers to the settings and parameters that define how an application behaves in different environments. So if we have any database connections, any third-party APIs, we need to configure URLs to them, sometimes some passwords, secrets, API keys, connection strings, etc. And all of that we put into the configuration, and very often we have like if we have application on different environments like development, pre-prod and prod, then of course each of these environments will have different configuration. By doing that, of course, we don't need to hard code the stuff inside the application, and we could make our code behave differently depending on these values and access different resources. The most common sources of configuration is app settings, JSON, and app settings development, of course, environmental variables, command line arguments, user secrets. Who works with Azure? We use Azure App Configuration Key Vault. I'm pretty sure that on Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud that they have their own solutions, but I'm not familiar with them. And some external configuration providers, like we could store it in database or custom files, things like that. What issues we come across when we deal with configuration? Very often it's spread across multiple files, of course, environments, as I've mentioned, and or providers. So sometimes some of the entries we have in app settings, some of them we have in other sources like Azure app configuration, or even injected as arguments if we deal with Kubernetes. So there is multiple places, and it's not always clear where they come from. The second thing is lack of validation. So basically, if we want add any validation or checking, and if we miss setting up any configuration key, then it will go unnoticed until runtime. And very often we see these weird exceptions, and then we realize after deployment, oh my God, I forgot to put this or that. Duplication, of course, if we have multiple sources, like let's say key vault app settings and arguments, these few sources of configuration could have the same keys, the same entries. So it's sometimes causing also issues. Also complexity. I'm always thinking like when we put like secrets or connection strings, things like that. For example, in the app settings, is it secure? And if it's traveling through the application, like what would happen if someone would get this data? And also, it's quite difficult to debug this because like very often like we don't even know like when it happened. We know that we have missing configuration and yeah, that's some of the most common problems with configuration. Okay, before we jump to next slide, I would like to show you some code to make it a little bit more interesting. Let's jump to the branch number 1. Oh, fantastic. Right, so what do I have in here? Very simple demo controller and program CS. So yeah, this is API application in .NET, and that's everything what we have in program CS configured. I'm using Serilog, so you could nicely see what how like the values look like. And I've prepared these requests HTTP files, so I could trigger the requests to my API from IDE, so I won't have to switch to Swagger, just for so it will be like clearer and easier to understand what's going on. So what our demo controller does. This is controller, but of course, like we have multiple places where we want to inject our configuration, right? So it might be some services, like it might be any place in the code where we need this configuration. The most common approach and the fastest, easier one is to just inject iConfiguration. As you can see in latest .NET, we don't need to even specify that we're using app settings.json. It's like the framework knows that this is something that adds the configuration. Let's hide that. So yeah, when we inject iConfiguration, then to extract any data, let me show you how my configuration looks like. So basically, I have very simple configuration for Kafka. These are not real values, of course. It's just mock, just to show you how it could look like. That we could have section and we can have subsection. And for example, we could have some values as integers, some of them as booleans, and even more advanced stuff. I'll show you further down the line. So in this demo controller, I'm doing very simple thing. I'm just getting this Kafka section. Then from this section, I'm getting the config, and then I'm getting the values. So as you can see, I'm getting timeout in milliseconds as integer. And here I've made a mistake, but this is I've made this mistake especially so you could see what's going on when we make any mistake. And the issue is that here we pass the everything as strings, and we need to type it in. So it's very common that we might make a spelling mistake or something, and we'll run into issues. So let me run this application. Okay, and let me run the request. As you can see, we have exception, which says an unhandled exception, blah, 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 failed to convert configuration value at Kafka config timeout in seconds to type system boolean. 1000 is not a valid value for boolean. So we have exception which explain us what's going on, but we might make it better. So let's switch that to enabled, because that's the value that I have as boolean. And now, okay, restart the app, and we had 500 on the call. So when I restarted the app, if I made the request one more time, now I'm getting my options. And because I've specified that this is integer, this is boolean, I'm getting them as integer and boolean. However, like I need to retrieve everything one by one. And also one more important thing to notice is that if we do that, let me put a breakpoint here and let me start it in debug mode. Come on. Here it is. So when we inject iConfiguration, we're loading everything what we have. So all the environmental variables from our machine, from our user, from any configuration that we've added is loaded to each place where we inject this iConfiguration. It's not like slow, it's pretty fast, but basically we're moving all of this configuration across our application, which is not ideal. Right, so what now, like how we can improve on that? What can we do to make it better? Let me stop it all. Let's go back to presentation. We could add validation, and by adding validation, we could basically check what values we have in our configuration, if it's of correct type, and many other things. And also what we could do is we could extract these values from, for example, app settings or any other configuration provider to its own class. So it could be very easily used instead of just knowing the type and specifying each time when we want to retrieve what type we want to retrieve, and come across these troubles that I've showed you. We might use a thing that is called that's, I think by mistake I went a few slides forward, but okay, let's get back. Yeah, we can simplify multi-source configurations by using iOptions. So basically with iOptions, we'll create a special class which will hold only part of our validation that we are interested for given context. We can add startup validation with fluent validation or data annotations to check for missing or invalid values during application startup, and ensure that the messages that we're retrieving is clear and easy to understand. And it's even easier to read in the code. So let me jump to the code again, and let's jump to second branch. So in the second branch, I have in my controller, I have 2 endpoints, and I've introduced another section in my app settings. And as you can see, it's pretty complex section. So because we have like store, like when we might have this scenario. So if our customer sells their product, the product that we create to some other customers, or they deal with some other customers, and they would like the same application to be set up for different customers that shouldn't deal with each other, then we might have some configuration like that, and where we specify, for example, I don't know, stores and IDs. Is it open? Opening time, for example. This is just example, and other customer would have this specified for them. Let's say. So under this section we have a list of objects, and again we have name, ID, some boolean, some date only, which sometimes exists, sometimes not exist, right? So to make it easier to work with such configuration, we have these options files where we specify the structure in the class with properties. So the Kafka options that I showed you earlier has this string, URL, integer, timeout in milliseconds, boolean enabled, and we specify section name here. I'll show you why it's needed. Then as for store options, we have the store options class, and because it has a list of objects, then we created another class called location, which holds the values for each object from this list. And again, we have the section name. And how to use that, how to inject that. It's very simple. So basically in program CS, the only thing what we need to do is do builder services add options, and we specify our class. Then we do bind, and we pass the builder configuration get section, and we take the section name. And this way we've registered I options of specific type, in this case store options, in this case I Kafka options. And we could, instead of injecting I configuration, we can inject this I options. How does it look like? This way. And now by doing this, we're not injecting all of the configuration, but just the specific part of it that needs to be used in certain context, which is really nice. So how does it look like? And also, of course, as you can see now, I'm just dealing with one object, so it's also I don't need to extract each value one by one, but I just bind the whole section, so I have access to all of them. So for example, I can do now options dot enabled, or timeout in milliseconds, or password, or URL, or user, anything that is part of this class that I've created. And same I could do in here. So options, we have only locations, and we could do count, whatever, right? So we're just dealing with them as with another object in .NET. So if I debug this now, and let's say I put a breakpoint in here, and let's call this. So if we look at our options, we have just this these configurations that we're interested in, not everything. And let's continue. Now you can see we retrieve the whole object, and in the console, again, we have the whole object, because that's what we And that's what we log in here, and that's what we return. And the same with store config. If I request that, we can see we're getting the whole object with list of locations. ID is integer, Boolean. Here we have datetime, but it's not simple because it's JSON anyway. But in log we can see that it can tell that it is time only. So there is one thing with all of that. If I now, let's say do, for example, here I have first store and first store, and then I have third store. As you can see, like this is completely fine. I was running application and there is no way of determining if it's valid or not valid. We could have the same IDs, for example, here. And what if we would like to have them unique? I'll show you how to do that in a second. But while we're still on this branch, I just wanted to show you one more thing, which is, so if I change, for example, this value to test user 2, yeah, in Kafka, or like maybe I've spotted that this should be second store. I've changed this. I've changed this value in app settings, and when I save app settings, and if I make this request again, then I'm getting I'm getting the same value that I got when the application started. So it's not loading the latest values after the change in our configuration source. And I'll show you how to change that also in a moment. Let's jump to third branch. Once again, to be public. Oh no, it's better now. Okay, and to our presentation. Yeah, so now I'll show you how to validate for clarity. This I options I showed you how you can put your values into object, and I'll not again. I'll show you how to use Fluent validation for validating the configuration, and also how to do it on startup. So basically, what happens now, like you've noticed when I triggered in this first branch, when I triggered the endpoint, and when I was trying to parse integer into Boolean, it threw me an exception, but not when the application was starting, but at the moment when I was attempting to retrieve it, which is very often too late, because we would like to know it straight away. Because like if when application is starting, if we don't have a valid configuration, then we straight away know that it might cause some potential issues. Not that we, let's say, deploy a new version of application to pre-prod environment. We can see unit tests have passed, the application is building, everything is passing, but then eventually testers comes to us and says, look, there is some weird exceptions. Why it happens? Because we haven't checked if the configuration is all right at the startup. If we would do that at the startup, we would notice it straight away, because the environment wouldn't even start. So I'll show you how to do that. And yeah, benefits of that, we have clear immediate feedback of on configuration issues, avoid surprises in production environments, streamline onboarding for developers, but by ensuring all required settings are defined upfront. And this is really valid point, because like in my current project, we've set up a new application, and we did the validation on startup, and we use these options. And when new developer came to join us, we just gave him application, he started it, and like, even though we're missing some of the README, he was able to very easily determine what he's missing and what he need to add just from these exceptions. And when he had everything, application started, and he knew that, at least from the configuration perspective, he have everything what he needs on his local environment. So let's jump to the most interesting part of the code. So what has changed here? Basically, I've added this validation folder where I've added Kafka options validator and store options validator. And as we go through these files, we can see that it's as in unit tests. I really like Fluent assertions. It's very clear, and it's very easy to write these validation statements. So, for example, we specify this Kafka options validator, which is abstract validator. This comes from Fluent validation package. And what we just need to do, we just need to tell it cannot be empty with message. URL cannot be empty. It must be, and we specify that it needs to be URI. Basically, this checks if our URL is correct or not. And if it's not, then we receive message URL must be a valid HTTPS URL. Same for user, same for password. For enabled, we can check if it's bool. Well, like bool, yeah, we can check if it's not null, and enabled must be of type bool. For example, timeout in millisecond. In milliseconds, we can again check if it's integer, and if it's, for example, greater than 0, because we might want it to always be 0. Also, we could specify that it needs to be in certain range, because if we know that we have some specific values that needs to be in certain range, then we could do it needs to be greater than, for example, 100, and it needs to be less than 200, for example. Then we ensure that any value put it into this this configuration will be within the range that we set. Very interesting validator is for these store options, because what we're doing here, first of all, on locations, we ensure that there must be at least one location, because otherwise, like, why we're setting up our application for a certain store if we don't specify the store, right? Its name should be unique. That's what this line does. So it looks at the names and ensures that it's unique. Same it does with IDs. And then name cannot be empty. ID must be greater than 0. Open must be of type Boolean. And opening time, as I've showed you earlier, our opening time is optional thing that it's not, we doesn't need to provide this opening time, but when we provide it, it needs to be date only or date time. Time only or date time. So we would like to validate if it's correct time or if it's null. So we can't put anything there. And I've added also some cron job just to show you how to also we can validate if it's a cron job, for example, and show you how easy it is to add validators. So now we're checking this opening time. It must be either null, time only, or datetime. Otherwise, we're telling that it must be time only or datetime. And then refresh con. And because there is no like built-in option to check cron, if something is cron, then if something is a valid cron job, then I've used a package ncron tab which has this method cron tabs schedule.parse, which checks the expression, and if it's correct, if it's able to parse this expression, then returns true. Otherwise, returns false. And we just, with this static private method, we can just add it in here, and it will sort out the validation. I've added here one more thing, which is options builder fluent validation extensions. And this one is not my code. This is taken from Nick Chapsa's YouTuber. He's really nice .NET YouTuber. And basically what this does is it allows us to use in program CS, it allows us to use this line. So what this code does, it basically, so in here, this add validators from assembly containing program, it checks our assembly for any validators and registers them as singletons automatically. So we don't need to do it one by line by line. And this code in this extension method basically checks for all the validators that we registered. And when we do services add options, Kafka options, we can validate it with this fluent validation, and it will determine which validator it should use for given class. We could also do something like post configure and specify here how we would like to validate, what we would like to use to validate, but then this section usually gets pretty long, and as I try to keep my program CS usually as clean as possible, then this approach with this extension method is really neat. Right, what's next? So we've added our validators, and let's see how the application behaves now with it. This is a question. We'll check that in a second. But this is a very nice question. Right, so our application is running. And now when I hit this get Kafka config, we're getting the configuration fine. But as we've seen, for example, our URL needs to be a valid URL. So let's break it and let's see what happens if I just remove this S. I would say it's still valid URL, but it's not HTTPS, right? So if I restart the application, and if I hit the requests again, boom, I'm getting an exception, which says options validation failed for URL with error. URL must be a valid HTTPS URL. So this is really, really neat, because now we can, with this validation, we can specify any different rules for our validations. And let's see it in action for store options validator. So if I go back, before we go further, just so I wouldn't restart the application each time, here by adding this validate on start, validation will trigger on start of the application. Validate on start. So now if I hit this button, as you could see, like earlier I had to hit this request, right? But now when I'm restarting the application, here straight away, I even didn't have to make a request. The application even not started, because I specified that what I want to validate on startup, right? And okay, now there was a question if validation is triggered while changing the configuration during running. Let's check it out. So first of all, let's fix this. Let's start the application. I won't be running it in debugging, because we can see the exceptions anyway in the console. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention. So on branch 2, I was using iOptions. Now I'm using iOptions snapshot. What is the difference? iOptions snapshot checks for any changes in the configuration during runtime. So it provides us with any update that happens to the configuration live. So while iOptions just takes the state from the starting of the application, it is worth like if we have like Azure, if we're using, for example, Azure App Configuration, it is worth to consider when to use iOptions and when to use iOptions snapshot. Because if we do iOptions snapshots for everything, then each time when we request this, it might make a calls to unnecessary calls to Azure App Configuration. There is few other bits and pieces around that, and but yeah, let's leave it for later. So if I request my Kafka config now, then I'm getting it. And now what I can do is I can go to app settings. Let's break this URL again. Let's hit Ctrl S to save this file and just make a request again. And boom, I'm getting an exception, because validation now fails, right? So if I fix it again, oh, spelling mistake. Brilliant. HTTPS. Let's save it again. Let's just make another request. And here it works. Of course, it has exception because it gives the whole history, but as you can see in the response, we retrieved fixed configuration, and now in the log we can see that we're getting it. So this is really neat, because if we're using this iOptions snapshot, if we have just this few configurations, and then or we can afford to just hit the for example Azure App Configuration every time, then with using iOptions snapshot and using this validation, even after deploying application to certain environment like free prod, when we'll see in the logs that we're having this validation error, we could just switch the value, or add the certain value into our Azure app configuration, and it should fix our app. Of course, it depends on the case, but it's really nice. What else I can show you? Like if I break this cron job. Oh, this is interesting. What if I switch that to, let's say, this? And if I said, am I going to get exception? Oh, interesting. Like I didn't have, or did I have exception? I didn't have exception, but it failed to bind this as one of the locations because I broke the opening time. It's not daytime anymore. If I break the cron job, so let's do 0 and 0. If I save that, and if I make a request again, now I'm getting exception saying refresh cron must be valid cron job. I think that's pretty much all from what I wanted to show you. Yeah, thank you.